Hey, it's your boy, Sergeant Hooked and Henshins. Of course, like I usually do, I'm recording while my boys are napping. So, um, anyway, so today we are talking about the recently released crossover movie, Kamen Rider Beyond Generations. So this is the crossover movie not only for Saber and Revice, but it's also the 50th anniversary film. Centers the main plot around this new mysterious Kamen Rider called Kamen Rider Sentry, and his connection to this new um, demon, kind of similar to Gif. It's actually, I think it's described as Gif's brother or something like that, called Lord Diablo. That's where the main part of the plot kicks in. We see this young guy running through like a future landscape, and they say, Earth has been overrun by demons. They're known now as the Demon Riders, and we see like some silhouettes of some like evil riders from past seasons and stuff that the demons have taken the form of, which you don't ever get explained why, which is odd to me. But whatever. Um, so um, he is eventually identified as Momose Rio Nosque. And Rio Nosque meets up with old George Karzaki, gives him the Sentry belt to become Kamen Rider Sentry once he meets a member of his bloodline. He has to have somebody from his bloodline to match with him and needs them to transform together. They have to work together to transform. And so that's in 2071. He uses the belt, takes him back to 2021. He said, Lord Diablo has taken over, so that's the time when he was gathering his power. If you can stop him then, it'll prevent this future from ever happening. So he goes back, and I think some of the first people to encounter everything with it is the Dead Man's Find. I think this, like, what they think is a Phoenix lab, and then Daiji finds out later it's actually a Shocker lab. So what's cool about this movie is that it does a really good job of handling the Revice cast, the new cast in terms of Reno's and eventually his son Hideo that's in it, um, and it does a decent job with the Saber cast. I mean, I guess I'd have to ask like a full Saber fan. I wasn't like the biggest fan of Saber, and even it kind of a little upset me how I kind of felt like the Saber cast kind of took like a back seat, sort of, which was odd, to say the least. um, but yeah, so main plot kicks in, and we introduce this guy Hideo, who is Rinosuke's son. We find out Rinosuke is back from 1971, um, and we get backstory from him. We'll get to that in a minute, but basically, Lord Diablo is being his stamps being used across the world, and he needs to consolidate these 5 points. In the middle of it, he'll consolidate all this power and be really strong and take over. They're trying to stop that from happening to prevent the future where Century just was at, where Rinosuke just was. Um, Fun fact: the reason they call the new rider in this Kamen Rider Century is because at the press conference for Decade, they had hoped that in 90 years from now, or whatever, how many years, 50 years from now, whatever it is, from that time, that they'll be doing Kamen Rider Century at that point. Like they'll be doing it for 100 years. Um, so that's why they called it. It's a nice little callback to that. It's cool that they use that name. But his suit design is really cool. There's two different forms. There's Kamen Rider Sentry Break, which is like a berserker version of it that's got more red to it and just looks more evil. And then there's just the normal Kamen Rider Sentry, which looks much better in my opinion. Both suits are awesome, but the full just Sentry form is great. Um, so the Deadmans are kind of working with them. Uh, Diablo creates like 4 or 5 stamps to go to like become new monsters and whatever. And so they're working with them along with the Chameleon Deadman's in it too, the one that killed the Phoenix director. Hiromi's part of it in this one. He's in there. Daiji, Sakura, Ikki, Vice. I think even the parents show up for a little bit too. Um, but actually, the plot kicks in for them is because some of the Saber cast is there at their bathhouse, and that's when all the things start happening. They start figuring out, okay, there's this demon stuff happening, and blah blah blah. And Daiji goes to do reconnaissance, finds out the lab they're at wasn't a Phoenix lab; it was a Shocker lab. They do something really cool in this movie. So the backstory for Rio Nosque is really cool. So he's from 1971, and he was like very, very intelligent, like a geneticist, went to college for it, had all these, papers and dissertations about it, was laughed away, basically laughing right. Nobody took him seriously. So that turned him a little sour. And he had a son, Hideo, who's still alive, and actually has his own son named Shinichi, who he has a great relationship with. Well, he had promised Hideo that he would come back and he would ride the first bullet train with him because that time I think is about the time when bullet trains were getting to be a big thing. And in the future, Hideo is actually a bullet train specialist, like works on them and everything. So essentially, he leaves his family behind to fully. He gets recruited by Shocker, and he helps them create, with his research with genetics and devils and stuff like that, helps them create their, way that they turn people into monsters in the original show. And he actually is the one that helped, that's partially responsible for creating Ichigo. It's cool. So in this movie, Ichigo's in it, and he's being played by the actor, is actually Hiroshi Fujioka's son. If you don't know, Hiroshi Fujioka is the name of the actor who played Takeshi Hongo in the original 1971 Ichigo series. Very important guy, very awesome guy, always been great with the fans, loves the franchise, talks about all the seasons, how great they are, super proud, cool dude. Um, I've been thinking for a while, like, wow, what if his son played, him in a movie? That'd be so cool. And, or was like the new writer in another season or something like that. Well, we finally kind of got our wish. So they wanted to do a sequence in this where they have a young Takeshi Hongo fighting, as Ichigo, fighting some chakra grunts and stuff, right? And so his son, I forgot to look up the name, but his son in real life gets to play him, complete with like the full costume. He's like replicating the voice and everything, right? Henshin, all that. He does the full, henshin pose thing, and it's a pretty badass sequence, and it's a very good attention to detail. The color palette's right, the action's right. There's the chakra grunts running around, um, and they do this awesome thing where back in the day with that and with Sentai at the time, if someone was going to get like kicked off of a cliff or something, sorry, I gotta itch my leg, just move the whole camera. They would um, dress up a mannequin in the costume of that person and then just throw them off the cliff. But it would be very clear that it's a mannequin. I mean, at the time it was probably somewhat convincing, but it gets clear now. Like, yeah, that's a mannequin. Like, that's not a person. And clearly effects have, tremendously, jumped since then or whatever. But it was a nice little attention to detail throw in to have that in there. Um, One thing I found odd, and I didn't at first when I first watched it, but I did on the second viewing when I saw this online from a good buddy Sentai 5 actually, um, that it was odd that they didn't change the aspect ratio to what it would have been in 1971, just for that sequence. I think it would have been really cool to see it in the smaller, different aspect ratio for that time. But it doesn't like take away from the scene. It just would have been cool. So, so yeah, so he's like deeply Rio Nosque, Rio Nosque. After I can, it's like my favorite sequence in the movie is that whole Ichigo sequence. My goodness, but so Rio Nosque is deeply tied to everything with chakra and creating Ichigo basically, which is really cool that they're doing something like that, kind of adding on to the mythos there and sort of halfway connecting it to like the stuff with Revice basically, because he also reveals that Shocker finds the Diablo stamp. So he talks to Ichigo at one point before he gets made into Ichigo. And Ichigo kind of tells him, Hongo tells him, if you're a scientist, you should be using your gifts for good, for helping humanity, for advancing them, not for, horribly mutating them and for evil means. No, and probably like all, I think he also mentioned something along the lines of the whole, human life is more important than justice and blah blah blah. So that has an effect on Ryunosuke. He ends up trying to escape Shocker. He gets caught, and they forcibly use the Diablo stamp on him to bring out Diablo. And they realize they can't contain him, so they somehow, they don't explain how, got him and Diablo and most of the failed experiments into like a spaceship, like a really shitty spaceship, and like shot it off into space so it would just be gone, not their problem. Ends up somehow finding a wormhole, and that's what brought him to the future. Um, and clearly it was probably like a Samurai Jack thing where, he was fighting Aku, and then during that time rip, he separated and Aku went farther than he did, and so he was there longer, all that. So, timey-wimey goofiness, and that's how Diablo got power in the future. And so he says, he's talking to Hideo about, because Hideo, like, is pissed at his dad. He's like, you abandoned us. You've never, tried to reach out to us, blah, blah, blah. And he's trying to tell him I couldn't. And he eventually says, I, this is my, kind of selfish way of, like, penance for what I did, for leaving you guys behind. And so he reveals to him that the only way they can truly transform and be able to defeat Diablo is if they're in sync. He's like, I'm not going to help you. I don't care. He's like, but the world's at stake. He's like, I don't care. I have my own things to care about. So while this is happening, there's a secondary plot thing that happens where Ryunosuke's body in the future is, all the belt does is send his consciousness to the past. It does not send his full body there. So his body's in the future. And so I think it's Vice, Toma, Rintaro, Rentaro, Daiji, Sakura, I think, and whatever his name is, the Yuri or whatever, from Saber. Um, Yeah, honey, you can come out. It's fine. um, they get to go to the future, and they have this whole sequence where they meet old George Karzaki, and it's okay, honey. What you doing?
I'm going outside.
It's okay. I just want to hurt. I love you. It's okay. um, so they meet old George Karzaki, and he has this whole setup where he has these cloned rider bodies or something like that, and can put their consciousness into it. So we have this sequence where they're fighting off the devil riders, which they don't really explain, other than like I think it would be the demons that have taken over for some reason, making themselves look like evil riders. I don't really know why, but it's just an excuse for a cool fight sequence because it's like a bunch of random smattering of riders. Like the first ones they do, Blades, Rintaro gets to be Kamen Rider Blade. He's like, oh, I like this form. This is really great. It fits me. Duh. um, but yeah, they have like they run through like three different iterations of it. They're kind of getting their butts kicked for a while, and then they kind of strike back, butts kick, strike back. They're really just biding time so that Rio Nosque and Hideo can reconnect and come back together as a family. One second, making sure that okay, okay. So, uh, Icky is really helping with this. He's talking with Rio Nosque, and he says this is very important. He's like, "Why are you helping me?" He's like, "Because I can see the look on your face when you saw Hideo." He's like, "What do you mean?" He goes back to the footage, and it shows how relieved he was to see Hideo. He says, "What do you know about that? Are you a dad?" He's like, "Well, no, but I have my father. And when we were younger, when I was, a kid, I remember running away at one point or getting separated from him and being lost and being really, really sad about it. And when he found me, the look of relief and happiness on his face for finding me was amazing. And I'll never forget that. And I saw that same look in you. He's like, you still care about him. You still love him. Try your best to show that to him. Because before he was just basically saying, like, we need to do this, right? Being forceful. Like, that's not going to work, you know? Um, and so he kind of takes that in stride a little bit and talks with Hideo and basically says, he's trying to convince him. Hideo, of course, is still not listening. And he says, Hideo, hear me out. Like, I'm not doing this just to save the world. I'm doing this to prevent the future, to save the future, to save your future, to save Shinichi's future, his, like, grandson, Hideo's son. And Hideo's like, Shinichi's future? And he didn't really think about it that way. And he's like, huh. And they kind of talk about it a little bit more. And he's like, you know, I still hold like some resentment, but I do thank you that you're not doing this just for yourself. This isn't just a selfish thing. And it was a pretty heartfelt little storyline. I think that their core storyline, even though they're new writers made up for the movie writers, made up just for the movie, was really good. I was really impressed with that. Again, I'm a little upset that the Saber Cast is kind of just there to fight and that's it. They don't really have a lot of story beats. They do a whole lot. I mean, they will reiterate on things other people say, but and it is set like after Saber, so I wasn't expecting like a whole new story or anything like that. But I mean, they could have done something where like Diablo activates some like hidden Megid that was somewhere, and they have like one final Megid to fight or something. I don't know. I guess I'm just more spoiled by like the versus movies and Sentai where they kind of meld the villains together to so it's a threat for both teams. But yeah. So and in the future, Vice acts like he's about to like go and like join the Devil Riders. And they're like, really, Vice, what are you doing? And they're like, you promised Icky you would help us. He's like, oh, did I promise? And then someone mentions, I think it's actually Rintaro says, you can't do that. He's like, what? He's like, break a promise. He's like, you'll never recover from that. You're always going to remember that moment when you broke that promise and you broke Icky's heart and lost all of his trust. That's never going to go away. Every time you do something, you're reminded of him. You're going to be reminded of that pain. You're going to live with that your whole life. And Vice is like have an existential crisis, and they eventually recants, and they all transform together into another set of riders and fight off some of the guys a little bit. Um, but Hideo and Rio are successful, so they heal the relationship, bring the body forward, whatever, and they transform together. It's pretty cool. It's like the Ichigo pose a little bit, and then they like cross arms and all this other stuff. It's a really cool pose, and the suit's awesome. So the final fight is Sentry, the complete form of Sentry. Icky and Vice clearly, and they actually use the Neobata buy stamp, which is the 01 influence one. They're given it by Daddy Karzaki in the future, which is weird because their consciousness is what was sent. So I don't know how they physically took back an item, but it's Rider, whatever. Um, but yeah, so it's so them, and then clearly Toma as eventually Cross Saber. So that was really cool seeing him in his final form, the most powerful form that they have at that point, which eventually go into Buried Rex at one point too. Um, and Century together was really cool. Um, and they fight together. Have a really nice coordinated fight sequence, all using their different powers and special attacks and stuff. It's really cool because to get Cross Saber to work, like he has to be in sync with the other, Saber riders, the other knights or whatever, swords of Logos or whatever. And at one point they're like all at the same time, like kind of reiterating what each other is saying, like we have to have this resolve, we have to fight together for peace and blah blah blah, and protecting people, and even if we're knocked down, we got to get up. The normal like pep talk type stuff, and they all kind of resonate together, and it's actually a pretty cool sequence. And then it gives recreates the Cross Saber from News again, which is cool. I like Cross Saber as a form. I like Cross Saber featuring when it's his, and then Rentaro and Kentaro, whatever his friends, the goofy potato sack wearing lightning Alangina guy. All three of them together was my favorite version of that suit, but still, I like Cross Saber. There are things in Saber that I like. They're just vastly outweighed by the things I don't like. But anyway, so they fight together. Really cool sequence. They do their thing. They defeat Diablo, of course. Duh. Of course, they're going to win. And it's cool because at the end, the spirit of Takeshi Hongo, for some reason, young version of him, talks to Rio Nosque and thanks him. And he actually starts apologizing to him. Like, I'm sorry I did this to you, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, I thank you. He's like, what? He's like, yeah, I thank you. You gave me the power I needed to not only protect people and to keep people safe and to, you know, uphold justice and blah, 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 but to prevent that ever happening to anybody else, yes. But also, I inspired whole generations up till now of other writers to do the same thing, all because of you. So I think that's kind of cool. Like it started out, it's like a dark thing where he was part of Shocker, and fine, they're gonna spurn me. I'm gonna use it for evil, blah blah blah. And then come to find out, he had like a big piece of like creating the writer saga, if you will, the writer franchise, if you will. So I think that's pretty cool. A little bit easier to swallow than the whole Ishinomori thing and Senki, and it basically all being about Saber. That's a little weird to me, um, but yes, they do that. They reconnect. He talks to Hideo again and says how much he loves him and he cares about him, but that he's probably going to disappear because the future's gone and timing wimey stuff. And he says that's okay. And he ends up getting on a bullet train eventually with his own son Shinichi, and he imagines himself in there with his dad. So it's kind of a really cool note. Again, they focus a really good amount of time on Hideo and Rio Nosque, and I really liked that. I thought that was really strong. Um, Overall, it was a really good crossover movie. I was really excited for it. I think they did a lot of really good things with it. Sorry, the camera's shaking so much. It's my laptop camera. um, they did a lot of really good things with it. I thought the dialogue was good, action was great, story was pretty much on point. Um, my one point I wasn't the biggest fan too. Again, Saber Cast is kind of just there to fight and look cool than they are to really do anything narratively, which kind of bothered me. Just kind of just like cannon fodder for the most part, which kind of bothered me. And used for gags. Like they have this whole gag I'm sure you guys have seen where Rentaro was like at the bathhouse, gets brought to this Oro Logos like headquarters, and like nearly drops his towel, and Sophia looks at him and then looks away and looks back and whatever. Like it's funny, but it's just like do something more. Um, I did like that they kept it in canon that she and the like last fight comes in with Kuriyami and is as a what was that rider called? Darkness Man Magoo and Saber. I don't know. Caliber. There we go. Um, so yeah, wasn't the biggest fan of the Saber cast. Didn't have a ton to do, in my opinion. It wasn't really a story about them at all. They were just kind of involved because they were there at the right time at the right place. Right, wrong. What is it? The right time, right, wrong place at the right time. Whatever the fuck the saying is, I don't know. But anyway, so that kind of bothered me. And then I didn't understand the point of the Devil Rider thing. Like, mention like if they would have mentioned that like some of the demons found some of George's technology and like stole some of his clone bodies for some reason. I don't know why he would clone the evil riders, but maybe he did and stole them and used them. That'd be different. But we didn't really get an explanation. They're just like, yeah, we look like them, I guess, because marketing, because rider. um, so yeah, so like I said, not a bad thing necessarily, just kind of like an unexplained thing. But overall, it was a really fun movie, and I was really excited about going in and happy. I've watched it now twice, I think, overall, and it was really good. I was really impressed with it. But let me know in the comments below, what did you guys think of Kamen Rider Beyond Generations? Did you guys like Sentry, their story? What did you guys think of the Saber cast and their inclusion? The stuff with Revian Vice and all of that. Um, And I don't know what you thought. Let me know in the comments. I really appreciate hearing you guys' thoughts on that and everything. Thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing, commenting, all that good stuff. But until next time, I'll see you next time. Stay hooked on Henshin's. You know, watch Rider and stuff like that. Watch Ichigo. Please watch the original Ichigo. It's available in so many places now. Pluto TV's, Tokusatsu channel. Tubi, I think, has it on there now. A bunch of different places. Find it and watch it. It's so good. It's so, so good. But anyway, I'll talk to you later. Bye bye.